Hello. So, in case recent content that I pushed out hasn't already given it away, I'm a bit of a game design fan. So much so that I earned a bachelor's degree just to pursue this endeavor. In all seriousness though, I've been working as a game designer when I'm not busy with YouTube stuff. Now, I'm not going to dox myself and reveal who I'm working for since I don't want to risk that kind of exposure. However, I can share the experience I've gained as a game designer. Yep, you've read the title, you already know what's happening, need I say more? Of course, it should go without saying, but my experience in game design would be very different from other people's. While I practiced game design between college and my job for about a couple of years by this point, I'm still fairly new, so don't expect some sagely sensei type wisdom. These are just the main things I've seen in my time as a game designer. Got it? Good. Without further ado, we shall begin. When someone wants to become a game designer, there's always one major hurdle that every single one has come across. What game engine do I use? Game engines are software that aid game designers when designing projects, and it's just general consensus that if you're gonna make a video game, do use one of these engines. It is possible just to make a video game from scratch. Still, you're then responsible for making all the code with no help whatsoever. You're gonna unlock alcoholism if you overestimate your ability to go down this path. So, okay, use a game engine. No brainer right there. But which one do you use? Well, let's just do a quick Google search and the answer will be simple.
Oh my goodness!
So, as you can see, you've certainly got options. That still doesn't answer our question on which one to go for first. Well, firstly, there are plenty of free game engines you can choose from, so that already narrows down on which engines you can use. Not to say you can't use paid game engines, but just a quick disclaimer from the expert here, the paid ones, at least the ones from I've seen, are pretty fucking expensive. Now, to hone down which ones out of the free ones to use. Well, that question is still hard to explain. Each engine has its pros and cons, and yet they all look so foreign to use. What do I have to say about it? It's quite simple. We have technology. So use it to do research on the engines, find out which engines are best suited for what, look at YouTube videos and forums, and essentially use the internet to look into what game engine is right for you. Who knows? Maybe you don't mind paying for a game engine like RPG Maker to make an RPG horror game. It's up to you to see which game engine is right for you. In my case, I like using Unreal Engine. It has lots of resources to be able to understand it, but it is more on the complex side of game engines. The only reason why I understand it so well is because I literally went to school to learn how to use the damn thing. In short, research what game engines you want to use before delving into working on any projects. A couple of videos I recommend if you want to find videos going over every game engine would be Emerald's I Made the Same Game in Multiple Engines, where, as the title implies, he makes the same game in multiple engines you can find from Godot to RPG Maker to fucking Scratch. You know a game designer is dedicated when they're willing to use Scratch for their project. He goes over what each game engine is best used for, as well as the pros and cons for each one, which should give you viewers an idea of what game engine may be right for you. I will also say that it's good to use the internet for things besides researching game engines, but we'll go more to that for other tips I have in store. Now, this tip might be a little confusing, but believe me, like with most things when it comes to game design, you will have to do research. There are going to be moments where you will work on something that you aren't quite familiar with, whether it's a new mechanic, a game genre, or even an environment based on a country you're unfamiliar with. You will have to research to ensure you get whatever you do right. Look up tutorial videos on how to do certain mechanics, look at games from the genre you're working on to get an idea on how the genre works. Take a look at the many resources at hand to learn about country or culture you plan on taking inspiration from, or possibly even basing the game off of entirely. You have the resources on hand, so use them. Now, why should you do research? Well, apart from the assurance that you'll know what the hell you're doing, well, just come here for a second, alright? This might come as a surprise to you, but we gamers tend to notice if a game dev doesn't know what they're doing. So, yeah, do your research at all costs when it comes to making games. Your future self will thank you later. Now, unless you have a pretty decently sized team, you probably don't want to start too big with your first project. Listen, don't get me wrong, I've had ideas for big games too with all these mechanics and stuff, but like when starting off doing anything else, it's better to take it small and slow at first. If you're working by yourself or trying to do something big right off the gate, you would have to keep in mind that all of the game's mechanics, level design, functionality, all of that has to be done by you. That's not even taking into account something like asset creation if you don't know how to use 3D modeling. I know it's disheartening to hear, but it's okay. There are some small games out there that are good, and chances are your game can be one of them since you had a project of a much more reasonable size to work with. I can relate to my tip here. I remember back in college I did like a game proposal in front of a class about an RPG I wanted to make, but the professor grounded me back into reality by reminding me how long it takes to make RPGs, with games like Undertale and Amori taking years to be made. It sucked to hear it, but I needed to hear it. If I tried to do this by myself, I would be in for a world of stress trying to make systems on top of systems work, and decided it would be better if I held off this idea for a future time. Besides, I ended up scratching the idea anyway, so I wouldn't have made it anyway, since I ended up not caring for it anymore. And if you don't care about a project anymore at that point, you're better off scrapping it to save you the trouble. So yeah, when you're starting off making games by yourself, start small, and make a game that's within your abilities. If you can't do art assets by yourself, there are plenty of online sources that offer assets both free and assets you'd have to pay for. There's nothing wrong with using them, as the whole point is to help devs start. You just can't claim them as your own. Of course, if you happen to have a small team of devs, then starting with a bigger project is more feasible, since you have more people to work with. Otherwise, you're better off starting small with your projects, and don't expect yourself to make the next Skyrim on your first try, since you have to keep in mind, you don't have the resources that AAA companies usually have to make big games that you know of. If you don't plan on working on a game by yourself, chances are you're going to be part of a team. If you happen to set up this team with people you know well, you already know you're gonna have a great time, but that won't always be the case. There will be moments where you will work with people you haven't interacted with before. It's just natural. But guess what? It'll be okay. As strange as it might be to work with strangers at first, once you understand how others do their work and start to warm up with each other, it'll be as if you were working with people you already know. Besides, working with people who have different thoughts and ideas from you can be fun and interesting, as it'll challenge how you see aspects of the game you're working on that you wouldn't notice if you were working by yourself. I can share this small story of mine since it happened in college, but during my last few months at college we had something called a capstone, which was one final big project that would determine if we would graduate that year or not. During the first month, we were waiting for teams to be set up because that was a requirement for capstone, and then we did get our teams and we were like, oh cool, I get to work with these people. But I remember this one student who was upset because he didn't get to work with his friends, and so we had to wait longer after he asked the teacher if he could be put on another team. I think he may have been on the spectrum based on what my classmates had told me, but I will say this as someone who is also on the spectrum. I can understand why he was upset, I do. But at the end of the day, outside of college, this is how the game industry works. You will work with that to be comfortable working with new people. Hell, when the true teams were eventually made, he didn't even end up with his friends anyway. I had to work with people whom I hadn't talked to much, and they ended up being pretty chill people. Last two tidbits about teams that I wanted to put here since I couldn't put them anywhere else. Firstly, if someone on your team is being problematic in terms of not cooperating with people in your team, that's when you just decide to kick them out. Listen, I know I just said you would have to grow comfortable with working with people you don't know, but that doesn't mean being forced to stick with working with people who make the game development process so much harder. Secondly, and this goes for any team in general, please make sure you keep communication with each other as clear as possible. The last thing you need is for two people to work on the same thing in a project and not realize it, and problems ensue because someone forgot to mention they were working on something. So yeah, basically you'll have to work with people you don't know, but you will also have to put your foot down against the disruptive ones. You must keep communicating with each other as much as possible to avoid problems. If you can do that, working as a team will go smoothly. This is pretty straightforward, but it's still good advice. Even outside of game design, there will be instances where you will work on a project that you will have trouble with, and there's nothing wrong with asking your peers, even in online spaces, for help. Sure, it's nice if you try to solve the issue yourself, but there are going to be instances where you can't solve them by yourself. Even if it ends up being a simple problem for those who are more experienced in what you're dealing with, there's always going to be someone who will understand you and not judge, and will go out of their way to help you out. This is gonna be a bit of a short segment, so while we're still here, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of the tech support people that I've had experience with between college and work. You guys are the goats for real. Game design would be much more aggravating and alcohol inducing without you guys. Have you ever played a game that you loved so much, and yet there were issues with the game that you feel could be improved on? That you decided, when you were able to make games yourself, you were gonna make a game inspired by it? Well, that's completely fine. There's a reason why game genres exist. Devs take the main features common in these genres and implement their own little twist to make their games stand out. Sometimes developers take a look at the games they played and instead put a twist on them to create their own game. And this method is perfectly fine. Take a look at Stardew Valley, for example. The creator of this game, Concerned Ape, was a huge fan of the Harvest Moon games and took those games, made a brand new farming sim out of them, and created one of the most successful farming sims that to this day is still being played by so many people. Now, what if you were just taking the game and copy-pasting it without making any real innovation? Well, you get this situation where an indie game called Dire Deck was completely ripped off by another game called Wildcard. And if you just look at these games, you can see the dev ripping off Dire Deck copied everything, from the art style to the gameplay with barely any changes. Even admitting that he essentially cloned the game. In that case, that's when it stops being inspiration and more so copying. But as long as you're making changes that separate the game from the game you're taking inspiration from, then you're in the clear. Little bit of a side tangent, but I have witnessed 2 instances where a company sues another smaller company, one of them being a single dev, just because they have features similar to their games, even though they're either Palworld's case, where its gameplay is different enough to not be a Pokemon clone, even though some of the designs are a bit suspicious, not even gonna lie as someone who enjoyed Palworld, or Schedule 1's case, where it was being investigated just by having a similar concept, which, like, when you're making a game about selling drugs, there's going to be some similarities in mechanics, but even then, it doesn't warrant being looked into. There have been other cases I noticed where people look at the game and go, oh, this is just a clone of insert game here. Either way, this is a shame. I think having games take ideas and mechanics from other games is perfectly fine as long as there's creativity and innovation behind it. And even though games being blamed copies of other games is a real thing, we should stop and look further into these games before calling them clones. Alright, side tangent over. Don't be afraid to use other games as inspiration for your games. Just don't copy and paste the game and try to make it original by changing a few colors, and we're good. This was something that was taught in my college degree as early as the first level design class I was a part of. My teachers had different ways of conveying this, but the general consensus was that it was best to leave prettying up your game at the very end. I plan to create a video outlining the timeline of how game developers create their games, but here's a basic rundown of the process. First are the basic building blocks to get the game moving, such as controls and the main mechanics used in the game. Then you build upon those mechanics with systems and levels and such that intertwine with the core mechanics. Then you do a final sweep, checking for any bugs or issues with the game that should be addressed, even though you should still be doing this in the previous steps too. Then finally, you pretty up the game with all the nice visuals and everything. Notice how it's only the final step where you work on the visuals, and that's for a good reason. To put it simply, it saves you a lot of time and trouble that you would otherwise face. How so? Well, let's say when making a level you decide to have your artist make, like, the Eiffel Tower or something. It's in beautiful detail, an incredible landmark to draw your player's attention, and you realize while testing that the player can't platform on it like you wanted it to, because the artist made it too big. You could just shrink the asset itself, but then you realize you would have to take into consideration the other buildings that you've gotten assets of, and making the Eiffel Tower too small might make things look weird. Not only that, but if this Eiffel Tower already had platforms made on it, those might get messed up too. And now you have to message the artist to redo the work, which could take God knows how long. This is just one example, but you get where I'm coming from. It's best to make sure everything works while everything is still cubes and spheres, so that way when you make everything look pretty, it looks visually appealing and functions as it should. Besides, graphics aren't everything when it comes to games. Don't get me wrong, having an incredible and unique art style with incredible graphics certainly helps make the game look appealing, and there are games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Expedition 33 that accomplish having incredible graphics and great gameplay, but it shouldn't be the end-all be-all for a game's success. If games like Schedule 1 compared to other games like Starfield have taught me anything, players would rather play a game that had potato graphics but with great gameplay than a game that, while certainly looking pretty, has mediocre gameplay at best or horrendous gameplay at worst. I suppose that now I've already mentioned playtesting, I might as well get this next step over with since it's pretty much straightforward but still important to know regardless. Regardless of what phase of development you're in, always playtest your game and check for bugs. This is a no-brainer. The last thing you need is for your game to release as a buggy mess. However, it's best to playtest at every opportunity because if there's a bug you had no idea about until way later in development, you're going to have a harder time figuring out how the bug even happened to begin with. This is a little off topic, but I want to mention it anyway because I remembered it while making the script, and I feel that this is worth mentioning. Back in February this year, a game called Avowed was going to be released. I was admittedly surprised learning this fact. I honestly was surprised that the game had been released this year since, to be quite honest, I forgot about it. I honestly thought it was released last year until when I looked up the article that I wanted to mention this video. Going back to the topic, the director of the game, Carrie Patel, alongside saying how enemy scaling wasn't going to be a thing in Avowed, she also said this lovely quote that had been shared amongst many articles. She said, and I quote, "You gotta accept a little jank to do something fun and creative." Jank, in this case, is referring to the break in immersion and expectation in a video game. Now, I know not all of you may be game developers or game devs to be. Some of you may just be passionate about video games. But I feel that you don't need to have industry experience to understand why this statement is just wrong. It doesn't matter if you find a glitchy game quirky and fun, even if you don't mind it, it's still an insult to the players who were expecting otherwise. Now, if these were bugs you as a dev may not have been aware of until release, that'd be one thing, since those are unintentional and are bound to happen. But if you go out of your way to not care much about fixing bugs, your players will not be happy, and they'll make sure other players know your glitchy game isn't worth playing. Players would much rather play a game where even if there were bugs, the devs did their best to make it as polished as possible, rather than a game where the devs knew there were bugs but chose not to address that, because, to them, you just sound like a lazy dev that didn't want to put in the work. Respect your players for the time and potentially the money they're willing to invest in playing your game, and reciprocate by providing a game that's free from game-breaking bugs and glitches. Criticism. We've all had to deal with that at some point in our lives. Whether it's something we do in our very lives, or a project we've been working hard on, we're going to be met with criticism at some point, and it can sting a little knowing something we've worked so hard on isn't perfect. But it's okay. 99% of the time, the ones criticizing your work aren't doing this out of malice. Instead, they're fans that simply want to see your game get better, so hear them out. It may make your game better. Of course, not every criticism is valid. There's going to be some people whose criticism ends up being something like, "This game is bad because of shit show," or something like that that's not even criticism at all. Of course, there's also criticism which, while being reasonable, may not apply to making your game better. If you feel that a critique goes against the design of your game, that's fine. However, it's essential to remain open-minded when someone critiques your game. You can't just always assume every single person that criticizes your game has malicious intent and create an outburst on Twitter. No, calm down and read through the critique yourself. Now, there's one last piece of advice I want to share with all of you. And to be quite honest, out of everything I've already shared in this video, this is probably the most important advice I want to share. That advice being, now, I know this may seem a bit basic or even confusing. What do I mean by this? Well, let me start by saying this. Your game isn't going to appeal to everyone, and that's fine. After all, a game that tries to appeal to everyone appeals to no one. However, if your game isn't fun or appealing to the audience you're trying to advertise your game to, then it becomes a problem. So, how do we avoid this? Funnily enough, this ties back to one of my previous pieces of advice, where it's okay if you use other games as a reference. Think of games you've played and enjoyed, and take a deep look at their mechanics and such. See, what game devs do is they not only implement mechanics in their games, but they also research mechanics and understand why people like them. You can't just take a mechanic, put it in there, and call it a day. No, you have to take your game and other mechanics into consideration as well, and see why people like the mechanics you're trying to implement. Now, let me be clear here. Just because what may seem fun to you doesn't mean it may be fun for your players. So while your own experiences can help, it's still a good idea to listen to what your audience and playtesters have to say as well. Think of it as a nice balance between your experiences and what you consider fun and the input from your audience and playtesters. So with that all in mind, make your game fun to play first and foremost. After After all, video games are a type of entertainment, so if a game fails to be engaging with players, then there's no point in playing it. So make sure your game is a fun game for your players. Who knows? Maybe you'll even attract people who aren't even a part of your core audience. So with that, that's all of the advice I have to give in this video. Sure, some of them may be a bit more on the basic side of advice, and I certainly don't consider myself a professional as of now, but I hope that this helps at least someone who's watching this video right now. If you have any advice on your own as someone experiencing game dev yourself, or if you want to say something as a player, share it in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like it, and if you like what you see, you can subscribe as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye! Hey, Unscripted Katie here. I got some news for you. Are you on mobile? If you aren't, get on it right now. So apparently YouTube has this new feature called the hype button, which I don't know what it does. All I know is that it helps boost smaller creators to the algorithm. Not sure why it's exclusive to mobile for whatever reason, but hey, might as well take advantage of a new feature. So all you have to do is go to the row where the share button is and all that, click on the hype button, and then click hype. So since I'm here, click the hype button. I'm gonna say it again to make sure it double works. Click the hype button. Alright, that's it. Bye!